Hello and welcome back to Uplift Equine's Classical Solutions. Today we're going to be talking about developmental training. And what I mean by developmental training is training of the horse that considers the actual physical development and mental development of the horse as a whole. Not just, okay, we'll look at development all the way up to the knee and hock joints, and then, we don't look at any of this anymore. So, no, we go all the way through the complete development of the horse's skeletal system and then consider the continual ossification of the bones throughout its life. I will talk about the industry implications of all of this after I talk about how I personally go through training the horses and how I feel that the industry should treat this. Currently, the industry is set up in worldwide industry is set up in such a way that will make this ideal pretty impossible. But like I said, I'm trying to set an example by the way I have these practices, or I set up my training practices and then give a few solutions to the industry professionals that may or may not want to follow in suit. Because I completely understand it is expensive to keep horses, and breeders tend to make their money by cycling young horses through and earning money at these futurities. But like I said, at the end, I'm going to offer some solutions and hopefully some cost savings advice to some of these people that they might not be looking at when they get mad at me for offering all of this info. Again, all of this information comes from my independent study of the horse and the horse's growth and development. Experiencing training young horses, many young horses, and then training my own young horse in the standard that I have set. Now, some of this information comes from in hindsight, and then most of this information comes from I've done this several times, and this is what I've seen as, what kind of institute success. So I'm not a veterinarian, but I can tell you independent study is just as good or not better at certain specific subjects, such as something as simple and standard as the skeletal system and skeletal development. I'm also looking at people who have studied this, such as Bex Nairn, through actual, live, well, the horse isn't live, but live dissections that they've seen. So they look at growth plates, they look at whether or not they were open or closed, what was this horse stress, what was the horse's stressors, what was the type of training they were going through, and then having as a control horses that have died and kind of lived a natural life, weren't trained at an early age or at all. So, they have their control group, they have their others. So, yeah, and Bex Nairn is also a lot of, as far as I understand, self-study. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And Bex, I love you. So let's go. And this, through this independent training, I have developed my own, or independent study, I've developed my own training process, comparing it to what I know classically, what I know through studying this, and what I have experienced in practice. So we shall go through this. All right, so what is developmental training? Developmental training is the way in which the horse is trained in consideration with the horse's physical and mental development. So I say physical and mental because the horse's brain continues to develop all the way up into adulthood, just like ours continues to develop into our adulthood, 25. That's basically adulthood, young adulthood. And the horse's brain also does that. So you cannot expect an adult level of emotional processing from a 2-year-old. That's just unrealistic. And it causes a lot of problems because a lot of trainers expect that out of their 2 and 3-year-olds, and it causes problems. And that's where a lot of 2 and 3-year-olds run into beatings and, stress of the trainers taking it out on them because, this is they create a stressful environment. And I say they create a stressful environment because the horse is just being a horse, and the trainer is setting this horse up for either success or failure. So I consider the mental and emotional development of the horse, and if you do not consider that as a trainer, there's problems. You are incomplete in your training processes. The physical development is also something to be considered because that can make or break the rest of the horse's life. And I'm not even joking, not even kidding. The rest of the horse's life depends on how the first initial trainers within that horse's life treat them and train them. So moving on. Considers more than just the growth plates of the knee and hock joints. So many trainers will only get the knee and hock joints x-rayed around 3 years old and say, okay, are those growth plates closed? Yes, let's train to the maximum amount of intensity that, we think that the horse will allow. And they will say, well, we're gradually starting them. I'm like, well, what do you mean by gradually? Like, there's gradually and then there's gradually. So a lot of people, and I know I'm generalizing here, but a lot of people consider gradually as let's give them 90 days to get the basics done, which is walk, trot, canter, and then see where we're at, and then let's start doing the lateral works and all of this stuff, and cow cutting and all of that. But that is not enough time for the horse's body to really compensate for that type of training. You can get a horse to do that, obviously, because most of the world gets horses to do those things and makes them do those things. And it is a fallacy to say that, well, since the horse is so big and strong, that if they didn't really want to do this, then they wouldn't. But there's a psychological component in there where, from an early age, many domesticated horses are taught that they don't have a choice. And so they just accept their place in life. So, or they fight through it and then they are broken and then they have to somehow accept their place in life. So that's what really happens. It's generalized as what's the term for it? Learned helplessness. Thank you. My brain was not braining. It is generalized as learned helplessness. So that is a big problem because the horse just stops trying. And the other consideration for this is that since the horse is young and thinks they're invincible, which many young people feel like that too, talk about, young boys, they think that they can fly, things like that. And they don't consider the damage that they're doing to their own bodies when they are being asked or made to do all of these things. So that's why the human has to be the responsible party between the two of them to actually say, no, I know that your body cannot handle this yet. I know you think you can handle this, but let's not. We are going to X this. So that's why every trainer has to really understand what this horse's body can and cannot take, or should and should not take. Because just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yeah? It is a holistic approach to teaching horses. So a holistic meaning physical, mental, emotional considerations with all of these parts of the training process. And that means giving the horse time to process, giving the horse's body time to adapt and to recover from all of these trainings, so that the horse's mind and emotional state are preserved, so that they actually have a will to live, and B, really actually want to do the thing that they're presented in doing. Not just tolerating it and not just and definitely not fighting against it. So this also shapes the way the horse approaches training to integrate it into the way they move on their own. And I'm just telling you this from experience. I didn't expect this until I started really training my first yearling. And I know, I'm 37 and I've got my first youngster that I actually own. But let me tell you, training other people's youngsters and then having them get taken from my training and then brought back to the training and seeing what other trainers do with them and having different stages of development through all of these trainings. My horse is not the first young horse that I have trained, but it is the first young horse I have owned and observed. So I have had time to make observations outside of the training program. If that makes sense to you. I hope it does. So what I found was that if a horse's training is started early enough, with these considerations in mind, and the horse feels good doing these things, excuse me, and the horse feels good doing these things, the horse will then start practicing these things by themselves out in the field. Sounds crazy, right? But I have proof. I've made these observations. So, just saying. I made the observations and wrote them down. I did not have a camera to go and film hundreds of hours of steering into the field and observing the horses at that time. So, yeah, this was extremely a surprise, but it happened. And it was through this particular program of training that I'm going to be presenting to you that this happened. So, what is the development of the horse? So, it's how the horse's body and mind develop over time as they grow. Makes sense, right? A simple rule that keeps things in perspective, and I have found it to be extremely accurate with all of the things. And I feel like I made this up, but I think it was just from other people's rules, and I just put it together and thinking, this is the most accurate thing that I have discovered right now. Because the age rules that, say, the American Jockey Club puts forth, it's like, oh yeah, so they're a foal, so they're babies, and then they're a yearling, so they all of a sudden become a teenager without anything in the middle, and then there's a 3-year-old, they're adults, even though they haven't lost all their baby teeth and most of their growth plates haven't closed. It just doesn't make any sense. That, in my opinion, was put forth because people wanted to make sure that the people watching horse racing didn't feel bad about watching the horse racing. They didn't feel like they're watching babies race, which they really are. Like, the horse racing industry is built off of baby horses being pushed to race at an extremely early age. Back in the early 1800s, late 1800s, when this became more of a sport. I mean, it's always been a thing to race horses. You got an animal, you're gonna race it, right? We got dog racing, we've got turtle racing, we've got all these types of racing. But the problem being is now we know we've done this education. We should all be, in the industry, we should be educated now. So this sort of thing should just be like a tradition of the past, in my opinion. Sure, race horses, but don't race them so early anymore. Come on. So, my simple rule. So, take their age and times it by 3. And I'm going to have this throughout my slides. So, times it by 3, and that's what you got with your mental emotional age in comparison to ours. So, my horse is almost 6, so 6, 12, 18, so he's almost turning 18, young adult. I consider horses a young adult until the age of 8, which would be then into their 20s, and then adult from 8 on, and then from 18 on is geriatric. So, but that's how I think of things, that's how I present it to the people that I talk to, and it's been quite accurate thus far. So, what is that number? We already went through that. And then, considering the above, what industry implications do we have? we have a lot of industry implications. We have implications where futurities would then be wrong. At least the type of futurities, like I'm not necessarily against a futurity. Up the age, not 2 and 3 years old, maybe 4 and 5 years old, and at certain like cap the thing that you're doing, to match up to an appropriate developmental portion. Don't breed for halter. Make halter shows just young horse shows. My opinion. I am just sharing it with the world. But yeah, the industry implications. It would become more expensive. I don't want to say a whole lot more expensive, but it would become more expensive to keep horses for training mostly because it's the amount of time that you have to let them sit and chill and develop in the field before you are then able to sell them as a finished product. Because people want to kind of run through these things, sell them as a finished product as a 3-year-old, and then of course you've got this adult amateur who is taking on this horse thinking that it is a young healthy horse, and then now 5 years later as an 8-year-old now has to do joint injections and all of these supplements to keep the horse alive because of the problems that started when they were young. So, and I'll go through this towards the end. This may be multiple parts, but we'll go through it. Anyway, let's go through skeletal development. And now I did get permission to use this from Tapestry Equine Products. They were very nice. I haven't bought anything from them, but they were nice over the messaging. So this was the best type of image that I could get that wasn't going to become fuzzy when I put it into my presentation. So that's why I used this particular one. But as you can see, there is a chart. This is like approximate ages. Of course, every horse is a little bit different, but approximately that these are when the growth plates actually finish and ossify. So what I mean by finish, I don't mean it was fully ossified and it's as strong as it's going to be. No, that means the growth plate is now finished extending and it has just started to ossify. So that it's still vulnerable to injury if it's overstrained. Everybody should get this, right? So the ossification of the bones continues throughout the horse's life, and the bones thicken and they harden and they adapt to what the horses are doing throughout its life. So that that is what something else that should be considered is that just because the growth plate has closed does not mean it's fully ossified yet. And as you can see, it takes past 6 years old for all of these things to completely finish growing. And just because, there's this misnomer of fast maturing and slow maturing horses. What they're really talking about is the fast versus slow growth. So, you see this in children. You see some kids, they shoot up really, like I met a 5-foot 5-year-old, which was nuts. But, a friend of mine has a 5-year-old that's basically the size of me. He grew up very quickly. And there's these people that, they're young, they're little, and then they turn 15 years old or 14 years old, and then all of a sudden they're 6 foot tall. That's what happens. That would be more like a thoroughbred type of thing. They get really tall really fast. And that is something to be considered when you're training them, because that means their bones grew so fast, their ligaments are holding on and also stretching, their muscles are stretching, and all of this is happening really, really fast. So there's this vulnerable portion of the horse's life that is prone to injury. Enter the thoroughbred, And then there are those horses that their bones slowly grow and mature, like my horse is a part Appaloosa. Appaloosas tend to be a little slower at growing up because their growth cycle is more, I don't want to say natural, but less expedited. So like he was butt high for the longest time, and he's finally becoming less and less butt high because the last to develop, those T1 through T7, I believe, bones, which make up the withers of the horse, are now finally beginning to grow and mature as he is entering 6. So that's the misnomer. The ossification of the bones to a healthy degree happened right around the same time with all these horses. So even though they grew up tall really fast, they're 3 years old, basically the size that they're going to be, that does not mean it's still safe. That does not mean that their bones and ligaments and muscles are ready for added weight, especially added heavy weight. So, you've got the thoroughbreds. Yes, they race. Yes, they have massive strain on their growth plates that haven't closed yet. Go to Beck's Nairn, she'll show you a bunch of racehorses, even racehorses that aren't being ridden, the sulky cart race horses. Because of the speed type events that they go through, their pelvis does not fuse properly because they're not allowed. It's too mobile, way too mobile. So it's just this. And I'm throwing a lot of information at this. Just immense amounts of pieces of information to consider when you're talking about developmental training, that you have to be really careful. And the reason, in my opinion, one of the reasons why joint injections and oversupplementation and all of this stuff that is normal in the horse industry, the reason why it's so normal is because we train these horses so early, so fast, that we cause all of these problems that we're now band-aiding with all of these supplements and injections. So, you can see where my suggestions for saving money are going to start coming from for later slides. Alright, so the skeletal development has to do with when the growth plates are finished growing and the bone starts to ossify. Just because the growth plate finished closing does not mean the bone is then as strong as an adult horse's bone. Bone ossification continues throughout the horse's life and can change depending on the strain that they are put under and adapting to it. So you start training the horse. You train the horse to have a certain muscle tone that will help ossify the bone further for further development and use, and then musculature maturation. Significant stress associated with training should be avoided until growth plate is closed, and then carefully managed in order to not overstrain the bone. And the other thing that I wanted to add to this is the bone and the connective tissue, because like splints, that's an issue, because once a horse's, let's say the cannon bone has a long bone. It's typically where splints are found. Splints is a tear in the ligament or part of the tendon of the horse, and it tears and then it just balls up into a little ball thing, and you got a splint. So now the integrity of that connective tissue is now compromised. Problems start when you've got this bone that has lengthened, so you have a stretched ligament and muscle and tendon, and so it's weak. It needs some time to recover. It's not an injury, they're not lame, they've just grown. I'm sure it's a little sore, but the horse can't communicate that. But and it's weak. And then you start training this horse under strain. So you start straining that already stretched piece of connective tissue, and then now there's possibility of tears. That's where a lot of splints come from. I'm not saying all. There are times in an adult horse's life where that can weaken, and a lot of that has to do with how people wrap the legs and heating up the tendons and ligaments and making them more fragile doing that. So there's another consideration. Alright, so let's start with a foal. Foal is, in my opinion, 0 to 12 months, because once they become 1 year, we call them a yearling. So foal 0 to 12 months, and that would be a developmental age of about 0 to 3 years old. The third phalanx or pedal bone, so the coffin bone, is fused at birth. So this is the bone where the hoof forms around and it kind of grows from. So if that bone is somehow fractured, or if it gets infected and the bone is eaten away or necrosis from some sort of inflammation or infection, it will damage the way the hoof capsule grows around it. Now there's a lot of implications with that. There's a lot of things where the hoof continues to grow normally, but it's like half a hoof. But you just have to consider the integrity of that bone is essential for a healthy horse's life. Yes, a horse can recover from bone damage there. Yes, a horse can be not lame or serviceably sound with damage to that bone, but we try to not damage that bone. But yes, they come out of the womb, it is fused. You can see that the horse's hoof will obviously get bigger. We'll go into that, but obviously gets bigger, but what really happens is the hoof wall is thin, really thin around that bone. So you've got these little tiny hooves, this little tiny foal, and it's so cute. But that hoof, you gotta know that this is very marginal amount of flesh around this bone. And then as the horse matures and thickens, that bone begins to ossify more and thicken a little bit more. It doesn't necessarily get bigger, but it thickens, and then more hoof capsule is developed around it, so the hooves look like they're getting bigger, which, I mean, they do get bigger. So that is that. But the distal sesamoid or navicular bone is also complete at birth, or complete within, the first year. I say likely because I don't have any proof of that to back that up, but that is right underneath the pedal bone, and that is where a lot of people get in trouble when they have a digital cushion failure. So you got some failure in the digital cushion, or some sort of shock that the digital cushion cannot absorb properly, and then if that could injure the navicular bone, and then the navicular bone starts causing all sorts of problems called navicular in the horse. Which then you have your own little package of problems. But yes, these are the bones in which the hoof capsule grows around, and the hoof capsule is thinner and more compact than an adult hoof. At 6 months, the pastern bones in second phalanx, the second phalanx and the first phalanx finish. So these are the bones underneath the fetlocks. So, the pink ones in the picture here. So that is also something to consider. And what I would suggest is allow the horse to be a baby and learn behavioral and social skills from its mother and small herd if applicable. So if you just have a baby and its mother, just keep the baby and its mother together until the mother naturally weans the baby, if that's possible. I say if that's possible because there are a lot of situations that can hinder this. So like, enter my horse's situation. He was 10 months old when the rescue seized him off of this one property because they were not taking care of them, i.e. they were not feeding them. And he had a pregnant mother that was with him. He was still feeding off of her because there was nothing else to eat, really. And 10 months, she only had about a month before she was going to have her second baby. So they really had to wean him quickly so that when her colostrum started coming in, he wasn't just eating the colostrum. He weaned fairly easily. He was a little scared, but it definitely was not as shocking as something like a 3-month-old would have. A lot of people will, especially breeding places, I say a lot because it's not all. There are still many breeding places that have better practices, but some breeding places are like, okay, they're 3 or 4 months old, let's wean them. And then they have this traumatic weaning experience, and then you've basically set this poor horse up for constant herd-bound behavior because of that early trauma in their development. That will cause problems, psychological problems. And, do you really want to set this poor horse up for 20 plus years of psychological damage? I wouldn't. No. But people do it. And then they put them in herds of youth horses that are all the same age, and then of course they, turn to horsey debauchery and they start having problems, social problems. So the development of a horse's social behavior is something that you cannot do as a human. You can try, but you cannot. A horse needs other horses. So if you have a small herd, such as other mares with other foals, or with a type of babysitter horse, so like going back to my horse, he became a babysitter for this one mare and foal. The mare was lame, and he was getting picked on by a lot of adult mares and a couple of geldings, so he couldn't really be in the herd because he was like getting cornered and he was running fences. So I'm like, can we just put him with a horse that's not going to chase after him, please? So they put him with this mare and foal, and he was well behaved. The mare taught him social skills, like, what not to do with mares. But she was lame, so she couldn't really chase after him. So he could get away and still have his space. So he gave her space. But then he also helped with that foal. So he helped occupy that foal and play with that foal. So he learned some social skills, the foal learned some social skills, and then he continued to develop social skills later. But these skills need to be taught by other horses. So keep the baby with the mare. I would suggest at least a year. At least. All right, so teaching within this time, you can teach daily life skills. So once the baby is born, a lot of people, they go and focus on baby, and they don't focus on mom as much. Mom tends to be an afterthought, which I don't agree with. You need to take care of your mare. Blessed are the brood mares. So take care of your mare. And in that, I would say just leave the baby as a baby and either put him in a stall near, or just, if you are allowed, and if you can, like if you own the place, you can just allow the baby to just kind of bounce around you, if that's possible. Behaviorally. It really depends on the baby and how bad they are when it comes to just free roaming. But if the mother is getting something done, allow the baby to watch. And if you are grooming mom, groom baby too, but groom mom first. So do everything to mom first so baby can watch and see that it is nothing to fear, because they are looking to their mothers to learn and understand the world. So if you do something with baby, you got to do it with mom first, in my opinion. So daily life skills such as grooming, bathing, vetting, trailering, farrier stuff. Farrier stuff, extremely important. You want to have a good basis of hoof development as the horse grows, because the hoof capsule grows quickly. So a lot of the times, if it's not trimmed properly, it can have this bulbous look, and then it's tiny, what's left over of the full hoof capsule, and it's not good. So regular farrier work, teach that early, very early. And then just about any, daily life stuff. I would caution against putting on a halter, even like a padded halter. I would say use that halter. People have these techniques of putting the halter around the horse's chest area as kind of a harness. I agree with that all the way up until they don't fit into that anymore. I would say if absolutely necessary, as the baby grows, if they get too big, such as like a draft cross or something, put them on a lead, but don't lead them without mom until they're a yearling. So yearling is 12 to 24 months. So now developmentally, this horse is between 3 and 5 years old, like a 3 or 5-year-old child. So expect the maturity of a 3 to 5-year-old child. So they will have ADD. They will not have huge focus times that they can focus, like attention spans. So expect a 10-minute attention span. Expect it. But this is when the proximal plantar sesamoid bones in a third metatarsal and metacarpal bones with splint bones finish. So it's within this year. It's not yearling, then those bones are automatically snap your finger, they're automatically finished. So that's when, and these are the canine bones. So this is typically when people are like, oh, let's race the horse, or oh, I have a Tennessee Walker, let's start putting somebody really heavy on them, training them. I'm talking about Big Lick. I'm not saying all Tennessee Walker people are like this. Tennessee walking horse community, or the fifth gated horse community, is huge. Way bigger than a lot of people expect it to be. So there are a wide variety of training practices, but what I'm talking about more is like Big Lick type things where this poor horse is broken by the time they're 3 years old. Literally broken, like physically. But anyway, that's when these finish and they start to thicken and ossify. They're going to continue to thicken and ossify throughout the horse's young life. These bones are vulnerable to stress, fracture, and splints if started too early. So what I mentioned in the beginning of this little slideshow of mine, if you start the horse too early, they will be highly prone to injury. I sigh because I know. But this is unfortunately typically when a lot of quarter horses are starting to prepare for futurities, because the futurities, they happen to such young horses like 2 and 3 years old. They have to be entered as foals because I guess there's some like sort of waiting list. It's the AQHA community in the United States. So I pause because of the ridiculousness of this industry. But anyway, behavioral training and routines away from the herd is started. So this is typically when you take the horse by itself now and starting to do the same things that you did as a foal, daily routine things like, farrier, vet, and grooming and bathing, etc., away from the herd environment. So this is a big deal for the horse. This is where you can see whether or not you're going to be dealing with some herd-bound issues, or if the horse is just going to be like, this is fine, no big deal. But the horse has to start making these connections, these non-fear related things, because the horse, and I'll go over this in a video, Understanding the Horse, but the horse's brain does not have a prefrontal cortex, and it has either no or highly lacking in frontal cortex. So the horse's impulse controls don't come out of where ours come out of, which is our prefrontal and frontal cortex. It comes out of their memory. So and this is typical for fight or flight animals, so like prey animals. Predators, they have to plan, they have to kind of strategize. Prey animals have to have quick snap reflexes where their brain just reacts before their conscious brain knows what's going on, basically. So that's why, you can see the horse spook and it's like surprised that it's spooked. Because the horse's body, its autonomic brain, has taken over into flight. So this is something you've got to understand. So an immature horse's brain is going to be more flighty than a mature horse's brain because it hasn't had the time to experience enough of the world to have the memories to tell it that certain things are not scary and certain things will not kill or eat them. So it seems obvious to us as people, it seems really frustrating to us as people because we're like, horse it's a leaf. But the horse doesn't know this. And the horse's autonomic brain doesn't know this. So you just have to work it through and have positive experiences that are not scary and that are not intimidating or awful. So the more positive memories it creates, the calmer the horse is going to be. Make sense? All right, so leading and soft tying should be done at this age. I like to use padded or like just leather halters at this point, unless the horse has some serious behavioral issues. So a lot of people probably saw me with my yearling, Revan, using a rope halter. Reason, He was feral prior to this. He had just been gelded, and he was very full of himself, and it would have been dangerous for me to try to use a padded halter because he would pull me around. We fixed this, and he now uses a regular padded halter, but it took some time for him to really get it. He's very smart in some areas, not very smart in other areas. Social behavior is one of them. At least social behavior with mares. Maybe that's just not him. Maybe that's just because he's a male, but who knows. But yes, leading and soft tying. Soft tying as in if the horse spooks and pulls away, it's not going to like break its own neck. The tie will release. So what I did, there was a hitching post where we boarded at the time, and I just double wrapped the rope around the hitching post, and that was enough all the way up until he was about 3 years old, and then he figured out he could pull it out. But anyway, soft tying is a thing because of the same autonomic flight response I just told you about, because the horse will react before they even know what's going on themselves. Gotta consider this. You've just gotta keep that in mind. And leading, even if the horse is like really good at first with leading, give them other positive experiences surrounding leading. So lead them through the woods, lead them on trails. You can trailer them to a trail and lead them around on the trail. You don't have to ride. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but hey, you got to keep yourself fit somehow. Get your steps in. Come on. This can help you too. And allow them to sniff things, allow them to experience the world in a good, safe way. Allow them to investigate things that will create positive memories for the future. They are developing their memories at this stage, so just let them do their thing, lead them around. I had the luxury of, having the first 2.5 years of my ownership of my horse, and 3.5 years, the first 3.5 years of, the first 2.5 years of his owned life. But it was a large property, lots of hills, and valleys, and there were a lot of natural obstacles that we could step over, and we just did a lot of leading around that area. Like, people thought I was crazy, but it's okay. But yes, leading with a halter on the head should not be used until this age to avoid ligament injury at the atlas. So the atlas is like that between it is the skull, but it's that first vertebra. It's where it's the pole. So you don't want injury to the pole. So you really don't want to do a lot of serious leading. This sounds crazy. Serious leading until they're about a yearling. And then continuing emotional maturity should be considered. So, like I said, don't expect much more than a 5-year-old's attention span and maturity at this point. They may give it to you. Who knows? There are those outliers. But in general, don't expect it. But this is also a nice ripe age to introduce a lot of different objects. So like umbrellas and pool noodles and all of these fun different things, and big balls. This is like a really fun stage. I like this stage because the horse is like, oh, what is that? And then they realize that it's no big deal. This is actually also the age that I introduced emergency lights to my horse. So there was a student that happens to be, taking lessons from the instructor at that particular stable, and he was a cop. And much of the time, he would drive his cop car down, take the lesson, and then drive back. I don't really know what the rules are between, when you're driving cop cars off duty, but whatever. And I said one of these days, I'm like, hey, can you turn the lights on in your car so that my horse can see it, so that, we become not scared of it? And he was like, sure. Because he knew, I think he had been involved in catching some horses that had gotten loose on the road and had seen, if you got your lights on, your horse might be scared. So I'm like, I think he considered it a good idea. So we did, and my horse looked at it, and he was figured out that emergency lights are not going to murder him. So that is also something that you could do if you know a guy. But, loud music, lights, if you have the type of property that would allow it, gunshot sounds, of course, keep guns away from the horse. We don't need that. But gunshot sounds, or even like those cap guns that they use for mounted shooting or something. Whatever your stable will allow, please be reasonable with people. But yeah, just experience all of these things. Enter 2-year-old. So 2 years old. Expect the emotional maturity from a 6 to 8-year-old child. So still a child, but they are getting a little bit better. So the carpal and tarsal joints are finished at this point. So it's those little joint pieces. So it's in the knee and the hocks. So there's all those little tiny pieces in the knees and the hocks, and this is what they x-ray in horses to see if the growth plates have closed, because then they're considered safe to then jump and do all of these extreme things, which, like I said, in my opinion, I don't really agree with, because it's not just those bones that you have to consider when the horse is under stress. You have to consider something like the pelvis as well, but we'll get into that. The knee and hock joints are vulnerable to injury if started too early. So they are vulnerable to injury because people consider 2 years old a ripe age to start riding them. And in the Quarter Horse Association, a lot of 190, 200-pound men, grown men with 50-pound saddles, decide to get on these poor horses at 2 years old to get these silly futurities done. And I mean, they start this training at 1 year old, at a yearling, so stress. But yes, they're vulnerable to injury, and that's typically, if you're like, I would never buy a shown quarter horse, because I can almost guarantee you, any shown quarter horse was started way too early is going to have knee and hock problems after 8 years old, into their 6th year. And I'm just going to be spending an exorbitant amounts of money trying to make this horse comfortable. Because they have this futurity thing. It's nuts. But the racing horse community is also guilty of this. And even the dressage community and jumping community, like, yeah, they'll show at later ages, but when do they really start training? And it's different for every barn, and it's different for every trainer. But that's the big question that I have. Like, when did this training actually start? So, the typical injury at this age due to overstrain, futurity training, but does not show until 3 to 5 years old. So, typically when you start to injure these bones and the connective tissue around them, they won't really present as completely lame until way later, when I don't want to say unnatural because it's technically natural, but like unnecessary ossification such as arthritis starts happening, bone spavins, and just nodules on the bones. It's just this compensatory ossification that, like, the body is trying to compensate for the increased demand on it, and it's creating these excess bony growths that's just, it's gonna cause a lot of problems. So yeah, and that's why, like, you got this professional that breeds this horse, trains this horse, futurities this horse 2 and 3 years old, and then finishes the horse as a fully able to do everything all around horse at 4 years old, sells this horse to an adult amateur for all of its things. The adult amateur has fun for 2 years, and by the time they're 6 years old, this poor person is starting to pay the price. by having joint injections and oversupplementation and all of these things because this poor horse is now broken. But they didn't see it coming. Anyway, yep, the joint injections are a typical band-aid for this training failure. So what I would do at this age, excuse me, what I would do at this age is basic lateral work. So yielding the hind and fore and side pass. So if you go to, my free courses on the YouTube page, my YouTube page at Uplift Equine, you'll see foundational work. Now, I don't have developmental considerations there. I will probably redo those things. The early videos were done when he was 3 years old, so there's a lot of things that were done, and then the later ones where it involved mounting, he was 5. But yes, basic lateral work, so yielding the hind end, yielding the forehand, and then side pass. The reason why I wait until 2 years old is just because I want to have a whole year of just leading around straight, forward and backwards. You can start doing some positioning stuff to help them, but I don't really want them to... I want them to have a better base before we start going sideways with things. But like yielding in the hind and fore, just to be able to position them better for grooming and in grooming stalls and for things. Doing a side pass, it just starts to explore the concept of side movements for the horse, and the brain start to making those connections. And it will start to teach the horse that its body can collect a little bit. And I keep this separate from turn on the forehand and turn on the haunches because turn on the forehand and turn on the haunches require more collection to be correct. This is just, you turn the horse's head around, they move their hind end, and basically I kind of allow it to be a little overbent, but I'm not riding them this way, I'm not training them this way, this is just getting them to move their hind end and forehand. And typically, if a horse is a kicker, or if there's a danger of the horse kicking, I will use I guess they call them training sticks, but Pirelli calls them carrot sticks. I use a carrot stick to make sure that I have some distance for my own safety. But yep, that's what we start. And then we start large half circles in the lunge position. So, and this is still using the halter. So I'll start having, and this is like a halter and 12-foot lead line. Either rope halter or regular halter, whichever is best applicable in your situation. But half circles, so I'll allow them to go in a half circle and then I'll stop and reward, and then we'll go the other way. Reason why I do this is because since these carpal joints are just starting to be developed, I do not want a lot of circle work. And much of the time horses are insecure and they don't necessarily want to go onto such a large circle. Like I said, there may be outliers, but you just don't want to have a whole lot of circle work, and you want to change directions quite often so that you don't overstrain these carpal and tarsal joints as they develop and ossify throughout this year. And this is the year that I expose them to equipment and continue to expose them to different environments and safe obstacles. So safe obstacles such as a platform, poles, and kind of make them more aware of where they're stepping and their feet and how they are supposed to move their feet around in order to navigate certain obstacles. I will not do jumps. Maybe a jump, I might raise a cavaletti to like 6 inches or something just so that they can step over something. And if they jump, no big deal, but I am not going to do like jump courses, like unmounted jump courses with them. I don't want to put that amount of strain because think about this. This horse is between 500 and 900 pounds at this point, maybe even more depending on the breed. And then you're putting all of that force and strain on those joints as this horse lands. Is that helpful? I don't think so, but that's, like I said, that's my opinion. So having kind of mental development at this age is also extremely good. Like equipment, put a surcingle on them, allow them to experience things hanging off of the surcingle so that they're not scared of them anymore. We need to create those positive memories associated with training and associated with you and people as they grow and develop, because bad and traumatic experiences at this age will carry with them. They will carry that with them throughout the rest of their life. So if you want a well-adjusted, safe horse, start them out that way. So experiencing things. If you have access to a trailer and the ability to trailer them around. Like if I had a truck and trailer when my horse was young, I would have brought him all of the places, everywhere. I didn't have the means to do that, so I didn't, but again, positive experiences. If you do not have the means to do that, it's not the end of the world. If you create a positive experiential base and a relationship with your horse, later on when you do trailer them around, it's a whole lot less dramatic. But we are entering 56 minutes with this particular recording, and we haven't even gotten to 3 years old yet. So this is part 1. There's going to be several parts to this, and I just want to thank you for coming, and I want to thank you for listening. But I don't want to make this too crazy long. But I do appreciate the views and likes, and please comment if you have any input on this. Please stay positive, be kind. I ask everybody to be kind. I will be kind as well. And let me see what you think. In my opinion, I think the industry should start changing, because all of these threats from PETA and all of these public outcries and problems that are happening in the horse industry, I think it is time for a big reform of the entire industry, and that is going to take everybody's effort at the same time. I do not believe that federal legislation should be in this, but I do wholesomely believe that change should start at the club level, like the AQHA, the FEI, the USDF, USEF, all of these organizations that organize these shows and events that are surrounding all of this entire industry. Like, if you made the futurity age older and all of these huge cash prizes happening for older horse classes instead of, and I'm saying older as in 5 and 6 years old, not 2 and 3. So not like old horses, but like if you just shifted that, people would have to adapt to that. The industry would be required to adapt. And yeah, you'd have people that would still go with the old ways and train their horses really young and destroy them, but there would be less and less of that because there was less and less incentive for that to happen. And as the professional world would change, then the amateur world then changes with it. If you get this amateur world changing, which you can see, the amateur world is changing with all of this understanding, and the adult amateur is becoming more and more educated, when the horse owner is becoming more and more educated, then you've got this professional realm that's saying, no, we don't do it this way. We're not going to sell horses this way. And so there's this dichotomy of like professionals that are doing it this way, adult amateurs that are doing it this way. They've got these gurus, and I guess I'd have to include myself in this guru thing. I don't consider myself a guru. I'm just trying to put out information that I know. I do actively train horses, I promise you. But yeah, and you've got this dichotomy of like professionals losing clients because clients are trying to become more self-educated. They don't want to just blindly trust people anymore, because there's so many opinions out there that you can blindly trust somebody, and then you've got these problems down the line, and now you're paying for it later, literally. So it needs to change at the professional level. It really does. And changing a lot of things. It's horse keeping practices, horse feeding practices, training practices. It's the entire thing. It's nuts. There's a lot of work to be done with this type of thing in order to get to an ideal spot, but that's why I call everybody to help. Everybody needs help. It cannot be done by just one person or one person just ranting online. So please join me for part 2 later. Hopefully, probably, maybe next week, but thank you for watching. Please be kind, and thank you patrons and local students for sponsoring this video and sponsoring me putting all of this information out to the world for education. All right, have a good day.